Well, the disciples were on top of the world. They didn't think that life could get any better than it was at that very moment. Well, each of them had made a sacrifice in order to follow Jesus. They'd left their families, their occupations. But it had been worth it. Every moment had been worth it. They had watched as those who came to listen to him grew from a few curious onlookers to crowds that amounted to thousands of people. They saw him feed the multitudes with very little food. They watched as he healed people and raised them from the dead. They were there. They were there through so many spectacular events. Then one day, after about 2 years, they were walking down the road. And Jesus stopped and he looked at them and he said, "Tell me, who do people say that I am?" And the disciples responded, well, some say you're Moses and others Elijah. Some even think that you're Jeremiah. And Jesus smiled and he listened. And then he said, "Who do you say that I am?" He never asked him a question like that before. They just assumed that he knew. And so Peter, who was the obvious leader of the group, he looked at him and he said, "Well, you're the Messiah, the Son of God." It was one of those moments that you wish would never end. The joy and the excitement. Jesus was obviously very well pleased with what Peter had said, because he said, "You know, Pete, you've got it. As a matter of fact, I will build my church on you." The laughter in Jesus' voice, the look on his face. In that moment, Peter knew that he had made it. And the others knew that they had made it too. So why couldn't Jesus have just left it alone? Why couldn't he have let them have their moment of glory? He didn't have to tell them right then. But he did. He turned to them and he said, "Well, you want to know why we're going to Jerusalem?" They, of course, thought it was to celebrate the Passover, because that's where all good Jewish males went during Passover. Jesus said, "No. No, we'll go to Jerusalem and I'll be arrested and tried and I'll be crucified." You talk about having your world crumble around you. I mean, they had just declared that he was the Messiah. This isn't the way it was supposed to be. The Messiah was to conquer the world. The world wasn't supposed to conquer the Messiah. He couldn't have died like that. There was no way that the Messiah would die by crucifixion. And so Peter spoke up and said, "You're wrong. It won't happen that way." And suddenly Jesus, the look on his face changed and the tone of his voice, and he looked at Peter, and I'm going to clean it up because I won't tell you in church what Jesus really said. Basically, he said, "Get out of my face. I don't even want to see you." You are a stumbling block to me. Just a moment ago, he was going to build a church. And now Jesus is telling him just to leave. How did he think the disciples were going to react? And was it really necessary to come down on Peter quite that hard? It was as if their world was collapsing in on top of them and they had no place safe to go. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us what happened after Jesus' outburst. We don't know if he walked along for a little bit and then apologized to Peter and tried to explain to him how he was feeling. We don't know if the disciples walked in total silence, afraid to say anything for several hours. All we know for certain is that 6 days later, Jesus led Peter, James, and John to the top of a mountain, where they were given the opportunity to rest, reflect, and regain their perspective. They were there when Jesus suddenly was transformed and was dazzling white. They were there to see Moses and Elijah speaking to them. They were there when the clouds came and they heard a voice from heaven saying, "This is my son." Oh, they were there. They were there on that mountaintop, and everything that happened there built them up and transformed them. It gave them the strength and the courage to carry on. And we know that those three did great things. But Christians, there were 12 disciples. What about the other 9? They were as confused and as hurting as Peter, James, and John. Why didn't they have the privilege to climb the mountain? They never saw the transforming light. They never had the opportunity to observe the prophets. They never heard God's voice reassure them. They never had the opportunity or the privilege for Jesus to explain to them that all was going to be well. But those 9, they had been there 6 days before when their world was turned upside down. They were as frightened and confused as the other 3. So why weren't they allowed on the mountain? Why did Jesus leave them behind? Those 9 disciples, I think they have more to teach us about what we need to do when the world crashes in on us than on the 3 that made it to the mountaintop. We've all been on the mountain, haven't we? When the whole world seems right. It's a wonderful place to be. But when the world crashes in on us, in those moments we want to have faith. We want to believe that God is there, that we're not alone. But we stand in the darkness. And as we face the pain and the fear, the isolation and the disappointment, it's hard to believe that the mountain is there. It's hard to believe that in the midst of the storm, Christ still cares. And I believe that it's the struggle that those 9 disciples had as they stood at the foot of the mountain. It was as if Jesus had just left them alone, left them behind. No explanation, no reason. You You just stay here. Stay here and wait. And yet in the process of being left behind, they learned a very important lesson. Regardless of how powerful the mountain may be, there always seems to be another valley to face. And while we can stand on that mountaintop alone, the only way to survive in the valley is if we stand together. In those moments when our faith begins to falter, it is the community that surrounds us. It is the community that protects us until our strength and our faith returns. Like it or not, disappointments are a part of life. Regardless of how careful we try to be, sooner or later we will find ourselves standing in the valley. And that valley is going to be filled with pain and disappointment. And in that moment, our faith will be shaken. We will find ourselves doubting almost everything we have ever believed to be true. We will even doubt that God loves us and cares for us. But if we stand together, if we surround each other with love and hold each other in prayer, then even in the valley, our lives will be transformed. The disciples waited 6 days. We may have to wait 6 weeks, 6 months, or 6 years. But we should never have to wait alone. We are the community of Jesus Christ. We have the power to transform sorrow into joy, doubt into faith, and darkness into light. We are the people of Jesus Christ. To God be the glory. And all God's people say, Amen.